I've been scrolling through Reddit a lot nowadays to read people's paranormal stories. I actually love scrolling through Reddit specifically because it's easier to find credibility in a sense that most people on there don't really have anything to gain to lie about these stories outside of r/no sleep, or in this case like Bhoot FM, where they tell scary stories for fun. There's just something exciting about listening to a real scary story. And I'm assuming that a lot of you watch or listen to this before going to sleep. And my question to you is, do you really believe in the paranormal? If you do, how do you get any sleep at night? For me personally, I like to find the scariest, most bone-chilling story, and the satisfaction of it sending chills down my spine is what helps me sleep at night. Talk about creepy, I know. Anyway, today I have 5 really good Bangladeshi stories that might keep you up at night. This strange and unsettling incident took place in Dhaka, Bangladesh, around 20 or 30 years ago. Here's the story. Kamal was a taxi driver. His wife, Tina, was his only family, and taxi driving was his sole source of income. One morning, like any other, Kamal got up and ready and took his taxi out. The day was already busy, and by 8 a.m. he had a few passengers. Then, a sharply dressed man in his mid-30s to early 40s, carrying a black briefcase, hailed Kamal's taxi. The man appeared well-groomed, like a corporate professional, and seemed to be in a rush. Kamal thought nothing of it. It was rush hour after all. The man climbed into the taxi, stated his destination, and without further conversation settled into the back seat. Kamal guessed it was a corporate office, as expected. The man quickly informed him that he was busy and he didn't want to be disturbed during the ride. He even offered Kamal twice the usual fare. Kamal, ever the professional, simply nodded and assured him he wouldn't engage in conversation. As Kamal drove, he noticed a faint noise coming from the back seat. He didn't think much of it, as the man asked to be left alone, and besides, the extra fare made everything feel fine. But as they got closer to the destination, the sound grew louder. Kamal was nearing a U-turn and, without thinking, glanced in the rearview mirror. What he saw shocked him to the core. The man who had seemed so normal just moments ago was now grotesquely different. His mouth had stretched unnaturally wide, his teeth had become elongated and sharp, and he was gnawing on what appeared to be human bones, wrist bones to be precise. The briefcase on the floor of the taxi had been opened, and inside were other bones, including a small skull. The noise Kamal had heard was the horrific sound of this man chewing the bones. Kamal's heart raced with disbelief and terror. He slammed the brakes, coming to an abrupt stop. The man, now fully aware that Kamal had seen him, was shaken. He pleaded with Kamal, begging him not to reveal what he had witnessed. The man offered him an enormous sum, 1 million taka, to keep quiet and not expose his identity, as Kamal already knew where he worked. Terrified but overwhelmed by the offer, Kamal reluctantly agreed. And by the way, guys, 1 million taka is, I think, $8,000. That day, Kamal returned home, still in shock. His wife, Tina, could sense something was off. When she saw the massive sum of money in his hands, she grew suspicious and asked where it came from. Kamal, feeling guilty and rattled, told her everything was fine. Tina wasn't convinced and worried that her husband had either stolen the money or gotten involved in something shady. Days passed, and Tina couldn't shake her fears. She kept pressing Kamal, asking if he had done something wrong. "Did you steal it?" she asked, but Kamal denied it. The stress eventually took its toll, and Kamal broke down, revealing the truth. Tina was horrified and insisted that they seek help. She suggested they go to an imam, or religious leader, for guidance. They agreed to go in the afternoon, but for the time being, Kamal felt some relief after sharing the ordeal. Around noon, as Tina busied herself with household chores, there was a knock at the door. Kamal went to answer it, but as soon as he opened the door, a loud, sharp sound rang out. A slap. Tina rushed to the door to find her husband lying unconscious on the floor, a handprint clearly visible on his cheek. To her horror, Kamal's entire face had become paralyzed. He could no longer speak. Whatever had happened to him, had left him physically and mentally broken, and that was the last time Tina ever heard Kamal's voice again. That actually sent chills down my spine. Any type of ghost story that's like in my culture, it just feels too close to home. Like, I'm scared. Lal and Shobuz were close friends, and one day they decided to go fishing early in the morning, right after the Fajr Adhan. They both went to their respective homes to sleep. That night, Lal was just getting ready to rest when he heard a knock at his door. He opened it and asked, "Is that you, Shobuz?" A muffled voice replied with a simple in a low, almost nasal tone. Lal didn't think much of it, assuming it was his friend. The figure standing before him was Shobuz, or at least it looked like him. Without checking the time or thinking too much about it, Lal grabbed his fishing gear and followed him out to the cool morning. As they walked, Lal noticed that Shobuz was walking unnaturally fast. He wasn't speaking much, just a few words here and there, and his voice sounded strange, like he was holding his breath or talking through his nose. Lal shrugged it off, thinking maybe Shobuz was just in a hurry to start fishing. They finally reached the spot where they had planned to fish, near a quiet river. Lal cast his line, and Shobuz began putting the fish where he caught in the bag. As the morning went on, Lal caught plenty of fish, but he noticed that the bag was strangely light. It didn't seem to be filling up as it should. Considering how many fish he caught, it was suspicious. Lal observed carefully. He kept catching fish, and each time Shobuz took them and put them in the bag. But then Lal saw something that made his blood run cold. Shobuz was eating the raw fish, not just nibbling on them. He was chewing through the raw flesh with unnatural hunger. Lal's heart stopped pounding. He realized something wasn't right. The person standing in front of him looked like Shobuz, but there was something off, something deeply wrong. The way he moved, the strange sound of his voice, the way his teeth tore through the fish, everything felt wrong. Lal was now terrified. He could feel the danger closing in. He was out here, far from home, by the water, and the last thing he wanted to do was be near this creature, whatever it was. As the fear grew, Lal's mind raced for a way out. He didn't know how long the creature, if that's what it was, had been impersonating his friend, but Lal knew he had to think fast. He turned to Shobuz, or the thing pretending to be him, and said, "I need to pee. I'll be right back." Without waiting for a response, Lal quickly sprinted towards the land, away from the water, his heart pounding in his chest. Behind him, he could hear the footsteps of fake Shobuz following, the sound of quick, uneven steps drawing nearer. Lal's legs burned as he ran faster, his mind screaming at him to get back home. He wasn't sure if he'd make it, but he could almost taste freedom. He either reached the edge of the village or heard the Fajr Adhan. The creature, or Shobuz, shouted angrily, "You're lucky." But before Lal could react, it vanished into thin air. Exhausted and terrified, Lal collapsed to the ground unconscious. When he came to, he found himself surrounded by the people from the village. His head throbbed, and the light of day had fully broken through. As he struggled to sit up, he saw the real Shobuz standing nearby, looking concerned. "I'm sorry, Lal," Shobuz said, his voice filled with regret. "I overslept. I missed the fishing trip, but we'll go another time, I promise." Lal looked at his friend, then glanced around the village, trying to process everything. He couldn't speak for a moment. His heart still raced, and the memories of what happened seemed impossible. He finally took a deep breath and made a vow. "I'm never going fishing at night, or that early in the morning again." This story comes from my paternal grandmother. She was about 10 or 12 years old just after the partition in East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, in a village called Babgani, located in the district of Anikani, right next to the banks of Ichamoti River. Her father, a devout Muslim, would always attend the early dawn prayer at the local mosque. One morning, as my grandmother woke up in the early hours, she felt curious. She quietly slipped out of her house and went to the mosque, waiting to see who else was there. As she peered through the window, she saw a large number of people praying, more than usual, but none of them looked familiar. In fact, she was sure they weren't locals. They weren't people she recognized from the village. After watching for a moment, she quietly left without drawing attention. When her father came back from the mosque, my grandmother couldn't wait to ask, "Father, who are all those people praying with you today? I didn't recognize any of them." Her father's face immediately changed, and he became visibly concerned. "Why did you peek inside the mosque?" His voice a mix of worry and disbelief. "Now they won't come back." He then went on to explain. "Those people were jinns. They regularly attend the dawn prayer, but they appear in the form of humans. They are good-hearted and kind, and they've been attending our prayers for some time. But now that you've seen them, they'll know you can detect them. To protect themselves, they won't come again." The next morning, as expected, the mosque was eerily quiet. There were only a few locals attending the dawn prayer, and the crowd that used to join them were gone. It wasn't just the prayers they missed. The jinns had a particularly fondness for mishti, a traditional Bengali sweet, and after dawn prayer, the local sweet shop would open, and though they're invisible to most, they would regularly visit the shop before the village even began to stir. Dozens of Muslims would arrive to buy sweets early in the morning, but that day there were fewer people, and the jinns, who used to come in the guise of villagers, were absent. The sweets, it seemed, were just one of the things that the jinns loved, and now that they had been detected, they would never return. I don't know about you guys, but Muslims or faithful jinns scare me a little bit more than the non-faithful ones because they are kind of tricksters by nature. Since they can read the Ayatul Kursi, I just feel like if I ever tried reading Ayatul Kursi, they would read it along with me, and that freaks me out. This is my aunt's story, which happened to her when she was about 15 back in the early 2000s. My family are from London, but we are ethnically Bengali. This story starts when my aunt and her family all went for a trip back to our ancestral country of Bangladesh. They visited her father's village, or should I say my grandfather's village. It was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by endless paddy fields. The village consisted of a few really old houses dating back to the days of colonial Britain, all built around a big pond. There was a small mosque nearby, and further away from the house was a small forest. My aunt and her siblings were told by the village and elders not to venture into the forest, where there was an old banyan tree. According to them, that specific banyan tree was supposedly haunted. One evening, my aunt and her siblings, along with some of the village children, went into the forest to play, despite being warned not to go over there. The village children assured that they played in the forest many times and nothing happened to them, as long as they don't go near that tree. The children showed my aunt and her siblings the infamous tree, and they all agreed to stay away. The tree looked very old and creepy, with its trunk twisted and its branches protruding far and wide. Despite its appearance, my aunt was not so gullible. As being one of the older children in her family, she found all this talk of haunted trees to be silly and just a tall tale told by the elders of the village to scare the children. However, she agreed to stay away. My aunt wasn't playing, as she felt that she was too old for such childish games, and was there to supervise the youngsters. The kids started playing it, then afterwards played hide and seek. The village children started begging my aunt to play with them and be the seeker. After a while of persuading, she agreed and reluctantly started to count as the kids started to run and look for the best places to hide. Once she was done counting, she went to the hunt to look for them. She managed to find a few of the kids quick enough, mainly the younger ones, but a few were left yet to be found deeper in the forest. My aunt walked further in, and shortly after, she happened to stumble upon the banyan tree. She smirked and decided to caress the ancient bark of the tree, going against her promise. She saw that one of the tree's boughs hung low and thought it would be a nice spot to sit for a while and take in the scenery. After the short respite, she pressed on. When she finally found all the kids, they all decided to finish the game, as it was dusk and the forest was growing dark. Everyone heard the call to prayer from the mosque nearby, so they all proceeded to walk out the forest and go back home. That night, my aunt awoke mid-sleep due to the heat. In the village, there were no streetlights, so everything was pitch black, and all you could hear were the sounds of crickets and frogs from the pond. She tossed and turned as she tried to go back to sleep, but started hearing a particular noise outside of the window. It was a metallic clinking sound. The sound grew persistent, clinking every second. She looked through the gaze of the window and saw nothing but night staring back at her. She decided to call out quickly, hoping for a response, but nothing. Shortly after, the sound stopped. My aunt brushed it off as nothing and went back to sleep. After a few days, the family left my grandfather's village and were headed back to the city airport. Their trip had come to an end and it was time to return home. While they were saying farewell to everyone, my aunt saw a woman further behind from everyone else, staring at her. My aunt never seen that woman before during their stay. She thought why no one else had introduced her to the women, as the village was all family oriented. What was very strange was that the woman was dressed in a traditional red bridal sari with a garland around her neck, golden bangles on her wrists, and headpiece hanging down her forehead. My aunt asked one of the sisters who the bride was, but her sister couldn't give her an answer due to the commotion. When they were in the airport and lining up to be boarded, my aunt's eyes wandered around, nothing but families all seated, waiting for their respective flights. She then caught a glimpse of a woman in a peculiar red sari. She realized it was the same woman from the village. The woman was further away from the waiting line, just standing in one place and looking at people walking past her. My aunt found it odd that it was at the same airport as them despite being seen at the village earlier. Also, what was strange was that the woman was in a bridal attire in the middle of a busy airport, which would be completely unheard of over there. She had no luggage with her or anyone accompanying her. On the plane, my aunt was coming back from the bathroom and was surprised to see the woman again, sitting alone and staring out the window. She asked my grandmother that had seen the woman in the village and asked who she was. My grandmother was too tired to answer and dismissed her question. My aunt concluded that the woman must have been from one of the nearby villages and was passing through theirs as she was also heading towards the airport. She then tried to forget all about it. Back home in London, after a good few days, my aunt and her family all went to visit another one of my uncle's houses. It was tradition to visit relatives when returning home back from a visit to Bangladesh. When they all entered the living room and greeted everyone, my aunt was absolutely shocked to see the same familiar woman in the red sari from the village and on the plane. My aunt was very puzzled and thought that the woman must have been related to the family. This was proof. Everyone was talking and my grandmother was recounting their time in the old country. My aunt was watching the woman and found it weird that she was just standing in the corner just listening to the conversation. My aunt also realized that the woman never spoke a single word and couldn't recall anyone ever speaking to her since they entered the house. She wondered why the woman was still dressed up as a bride and found it very bizarre. Y'all, I'm getting scared. I'm like already scared. About to piss my pants type scared. When it was time to eat, everyone was getting ready to sit down at the table. My aunt was one of the last ones to get up, but realized the woman was staring at her and smiling. She decided to say hello to the woman and ask her who she was in Bengali. The woman didn't respond. She just continued to smile at my aunt. She thought the woman was just shy, and that was quite normal behavior for the village women in Bangladesh. She felt a bit awkward and started complimenting the woman on her attire and her anklets. "Who are you speaking to?" my uncle said across the room in Bangla. The room was silent and everyone was staring at my aunt in confusion. My aunt pointed at the woman, bewildered by my uncle's question. "What? There's no one there," my aunt's sister responded. My aunt thought everyone was playing a joke on her, but shortly after realized they were all being serious. She started to freak out. She kept saying that there was a woman in the room, but everyone kept insisting that there wasn't anyone there. Everyone started worrying about my aunt, and she started hyperventilating at the sight of the mysterious red figure smiling back at her. She eventually passed out. A while later, my aunt came around and found herself lying on the couch, resting her head on my grandmother's lap, and her sisters all huddled beside her. My aunt didn't see the woman anymore where she had been previously standing. My aunt darted her eyes around the room to double check if the woman was still there. She wasn't. On the opposite couch, there was an imam from the local mosque. He was a respected family friend and community leader called over by my uncle. The imam asked my aunt what happened, and she explained that she saw the woman first in the village and kept seeing her until that very day, and only she was able to see her, as confirmed by everyone else. After careful consideration, the imam said it sounded like some nefarious entity had followed her from the village and latched itself onto her. My grandfather started to interrogate my aunt about the forest and the old banyan tree, and eventually she admitted to everyone that she sat on the bough of the tree. When my grandfather heard that, he got very angry and scolded her. He repeated that the tree was haunted and questioned why she didn't listen to the village elders. My aunt explained that she thought it was a joke. When the imam asked why my grandfather had thought that the tree was haunted, my grandfather never gave an explanation and said that he would tell him afterwards in private. The imam recited some prayers and blew on my aunt. My aunt couldn't remember most of the encounter as she blacked out again. However, according to everyone present in the room, she started to freak out and start to act manic when she heard the prayers. She started growling and her eyes looked like they were about to burst from their sockets. She attempted to lunge at the imam, but eventually everyone held her down. A while later, the imam left the house and returned and gave her special water to drink daily and to rub the oil on her body after every time she bathed. This was part of a really long exorcism. That night, my aunt was too afraid to sleep, so my grandmother slept in the same bed next to her while one of my sisters slept on the top bunk. My aunt awoke after a long slumber. Her eyes started slowly adjusting to the darkness, but she was still in a sleepy haze. She realized she could hear a clinking sound to her right towards the window. She thought it was her sister causing a racket, so she groggily told her to be quiet. When the noise didn't relent, my aunt turned and looked towards the window. It wasn't her sister. To her absolute horror, my aunt saw a dark figure sitting on the windowsill. She quickly realized that the metallic sound were the sounds of bangles and anklets being played with. My aunt's eyes fully adjusted to the dark, and it became evident that the figure was indeed that of the woman. My aunt screamed her lungs out, and her whole entire house awoke. See it unless she completed her religious treatment, which he reminded her was a very long process. My aunt's family was certain that it was a spiritual matter and not a psychological one. My aunt never displayed any signs of mental illness in the past. Days passed, and my aunt saw the woman everywhere. Though she did occasionally respite from the woman would show up one day and might follow my aunt wherever she went, but the next couple of days would not be seen at all. She would see the woman at school standing by the whiteboard in her classroom, looking at the pupils like she was teaching the lesson. The woman would be seen when my aunt was hanging out with her mates in the park after school, just watching them from the trees. When my aunt would go shopping in the supermarket with her family, the woman was there waiting for her at the aisles and always followed them from far behind when they shopped. Some days it would be in the same room as my aunt. Other days it would be seen through the window of the street. Some nights, when my aunt was laying in bed, she would hear the slow clinking sound of the woman's anklets going up the stairs. The sound would stop whenever it reached my aunt's bedroom door, as if the figure was waiting to be let in. A woman once was encountered when the family were all sitting at the table to eat, and my aunt found her sitting under the table with her forehead resting on her knees. She screamed surprisingly, but quickly disregarded the matter in order to not scare her family. The ominous figure never spoke. It never harmed my aunt directly or made any threatening acts towards her. The woman just smiled, that eerie smile. My aunt continued her religious treatment, which in turn made her very weak and sapped her spirit. The imam would visit her often, and she would have many more exorcism rituals carried out on her, all she could never recount. My aunt tried her best to get on with her life and started to get used to the figure always being around, and she stopped feeling afraid of it. She even started talking to it. She used to talk about random things, and the woman just responded with silence. Although she got close to the figure at times, my aunt never dared to touch it. A couple of years passed, and the mysterious woman would appear less frequently, like only a couple times a month. Eventually, she stopped appearing altogether and was gone for good. My aunt completed her year-long spiritual treatment. She felt a huge relief, but at the same time, in a very bizarre and twisted way, she felt sad and empty. That figure was in her life for so long that she grew accustomed to it and saw it as normal. For her, not seeing that woman anymore was a huge change in reality. This whole ordeal did take a huge mental toll on her throughout the couple of years, and my aunt was never truly the same after that. One afternoon, my grandfather decided to shed some light in the past, as he felt like it was the right time for my aunt to learn the truth. He showed her a very old black and white photograph dating back in the 50s. It was him and his parents and his siblings, all in a family portrait. My aunt's eyes widened and her jaw dropped as she saw an old familiar face in the center of the photo. It was her, the woman in the bridal sari. Garland, bangles, everything. She was next to a man dressed as a groom. My grandfather explained to her that long ago he had a sister. That photo was from her wedding day. The story was that she was married to a man from the neighboring village, but she did not want to get married to him. My grandfather's sister was at first promised to another suitor since they were children, a good, kind man from a nearby village. She grew up with the idea that she would marry that man when she came of age. However, the man she actually ended up marrying offered her larger dowry, and so her father then changed his mind and instead accepted that man to take his daughter's hand, despite the previous arrangement and his daughter's protest. In Bangladesh, it's the father's word over his daughter's wishes, and she was doomed to spend her entire life with the man she did not desire. So, in the night after the marriage ceremony was completed, she was due to move in with the groom and his family and relocate to another village. My grandfather's sister did not hesitate and ran off in a frenzy in the dark, never to be seen again on her wedding night. The next morning, when she was found, it was deep in the forest and hanging by her neck from the branch of an old banyan tree. My aunt could not believe it, while she heard the story as her eyes welled up with tears. When the imam visited the house one day, he clarified that what my aunt encountered was not my grandfather's sister. It was a jinn who took the form of her and followed my aunt back home to London. For those who don't know, they are demons in the Islamic world. In Islam, there is no notion of ghosts being trapped in their last moments of life. There's only the jinn that imitate the deceased person and prey upon people. The reason why the old banyan tree was perceived as haunted by the villagers was not only because of my grandaunt's tragic demise. A few other horrific events happened revolving that tree in the past. Once, a passing traveler was caught stealing jewelry from the village and was chased by the villagers into the forest and was hacked to death with machetes. Who did that to him? The villagers? The thief's body was slumped down, resting on the tree of the banyan tree with his blood painting the bark red. Another story was that a witch was caught doing black magic deep in the forest where bloody menstrual rags and torn up pages of a holy book with black markings and grids scribbled all over were found hanging from the tree. Ugh. Whoever interacted with that tree always reported to experience some sort of supernatural activity one way or another. That day, when my aunt first explained to everyone about the women, my grandfather had a strong feeling that she was talking about his deceased sister. I don't remember this whole ordeal when it happened at the time because I was very young, but the story was told to me by various family members when I was older. It was only recently that my aunt and I were talking at a family function, and she retold her story to me herself in the utmost detail. Her story was always the focal point whenever the subject of paranormal arose during family conversations. A couple of people think my aunt was just suffering from mental illness during that time, although this doesn't make any sense. My aunt never knew my grandfather's sister before that revelation. My grandfather never once mentioned or showed a picture of his sister either to my aunt or her siblings while they were growing up. Neither did my grandmother. It was a painful, touchy subject, and it was never heard or mentioned. I believe my aunt, and this was very real to her, and it greatly affected her life growing up as it permanently left a mark on her. I'm just glad that she's back to normal and that the woman in Sari was gone for good. In a small town of Kumilla, Bangladesh, a haunted incident occurred in either 2006 or 2007. As a child at the time, I still remember the chilling shivers that ran down my spine when my Fupi, paternal aunt, called to share the heart-wrenching news. Her sister-in-law's 11-year-old son had been found dead the previous night in a manner so gruesome that it shook the entire town down to its core. The kid comes from an affluent religious family who was well active in the local mosque and prayed all 5 prayers in congregation. Because of this, his face was well known to the community and easy to spot his absence. In the day of the incident, as he left his house with the males of his family for Maghrib prayer, he decided to stay back in the nearby pond to perform wudu, while they left to attend the prayer. However, It didn't take long before people noticed he wasn't with them at the prayer. Supposedly, he visited his aunt's house and took a longer route that no one takes at night, as there are no streetlights to get to the mosque. As the Maghrib prayer concluded and people prepared to return home, either one of his family members or local person made an unsettling discovery near the pond nestled amidst the trees. Since this occurred in the countryside, there were no streetlights, and it's safe to assume the place was pitch black. In response, the local men lit torches and illuminated the tree area, revealing a pair of legs protruding from the water, a shocking and puzzling sight. As they approached the pond, their worst fears were confirmed. The upper part of a lifeless body with a twisted head emerged from the water, and upon shining the light on the face, the devastating reality struck like a lightning bolt. It was a young boy who had been missing from the Maghrib prayer. The boy's father, amongst others, recognized the lifeless face of his beloved son. The horrific nature of the tragedy left the community baffled, as they couldn't fathom who could possess the strength and precision to twist someone's head and bury the child's head upside down in the water, as he was a heavy-built child. The absence of a clear motive, such as ransom or known enemies, deepened the mystery. Rumors and beliefs surrounding the supernatural, like an involvement of the demons, spread throughout the town. The family believes the same, as there's a well-known Sahih hadith: when the wings of the night spread, or when evening comes, keep your children in, for the devils come out at that time. Then, when part of the night has passed, let them go. Wow, that was insanely tragic. I know I said 5 stories, but here's a bonus. আমি 3 বার দেখেছি, but every time they were so harmless. They just passed by or stood in a corner. ভয়ঙ্করও ছিল না. Like, যখন দেখলাম, every time I was just like, this is a jinn. Anyways, there's no doubt that they were jinn. It's just, পরে যখনই আম্মুকে বলতাম, she used to be extremely panicked, and every time I'm like, তুমি ভয় পাচ্ছ কেন? কিছুই তো করো নাই. Chill. Anyway, I guess I'm lucky to never come across any angry ones. Imagine being so nonchalant. You see like something in the corner, standing in the corner, and you're like, oh, that's weird. Anyways, even the jinn was shocked. I wish to be that nonchalant. That's all I have for you guys today, and I hope you guys are as scared as I am, because I am filming this in the middle of the night. Okay, it's almost 12 a.m. I'm terrified. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe and like the video. Your support means a lot to me, and if you have any friends or families that would like to share their stories, you can comment on this video or you can email me on the email that I have in my description. Well, see you on my next video. Bye bye.